Welcome to Motherhood. I'm Dr. Christina Hibbert, and I'm here to help you overcome, to become, and to flourish in this often difficult experience we call motherhood. And today we're going to focus on one of the most difficult experiences we can go through as moms. We're talking about how we can overcome a mental health crisis. And what can we do in those times of crisis that we all face? Or if you don't face it personally, you definitely are going to know someone who will. And these crises can come in many forms, as we'll discuss. But we know that we need to take care of ourselves as moms. And that's what today's show is all about, is how can we not only get through these maternal mental health crises, but also how do we heal? And then beyond that, how do we use what we've learned through our challenges to do some good in the world or in our lives or in our families' lives? So I'll be introducing our guest in just a moment, but as always, I just want to welcome you to the show and thank you for being here with us each week. It's such a pleasure to get to learn and to choose to grow through motherhood with you instead of just going through it. I hope that you have taken the time to connect with us online, whether it be through social media, on our Facebook page, or in our Facebook group, which again is called Growing Through Motherhood, and you can just search for that and ask to be added, and we'd be happy to have you. Or on Instagram or my Facebook page, Dr. Christina Hibbert, Twitter. We're all over the place, as well as on YouTube, where today's episode will be featured in a video, as well as most of the episodes. Most of the episodes actually have videos as well. So if you want to see what's going on, check us out on YouTube as well. Also, I want to invite you to my website at drchristinahibbert.com for all kinds of resources, especially on the things we're going to be talking about today. Resources to help you through your mental health challenges and crises, and how to connect you with the help that you need. So I hope you will visit my website for that, as well as to links to my books, Who Am I Without You? And This Is How We Grow. And my new book coming out soon, 8 Keys to Mental Health Through Exercise. Now, I thought I'd start by sharing a story of one of my dear friends. And I know that I've spoken about her a little bit on the show before, but I don't think I've really fully shared her story. And today just seemed like the perfect opportunity to do so. And so today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my friend Jody. As some of you know, Jody and I were very close friends for many years. Our kids are all best friends. She has 3 children, and as you know, I have 6, and 4 of my 6 children are best friends with her 3 children, and we've grown up together. They've grown up together. We've lived together for about 10 years. And Jody was going through a maternal mental health crisis. And the reason why I'm sharing her story is because she wasn't pregnant and she wasn't postpartum. Her children, her youngest at this time was 10 years old. And so this doesn't just happen right when we have the baby. It can happen anytime. And even though I'll share Jody's story, there are many other stories that maybe aren't similar to her or maybe are similar to her. And you just need to figure out where you might fit in and see what we can learn from sharing her story. So Jody was a wonderful mom and took great care of her kids, was volunteer of the year many years, and everybody knew her, a wonderful friend. But I could tell that over time she was starting to kind of retreat into herself, and she was starting to feel like she wasn't doing a good enough job as a mom. Now, we can all relate to that, can't we? We all have times when we feel like we're just not doing a good enough job. And in particular, I remember one time when our 2 daughters, who were in 5th grade at the time, they innocently got into trouble at school by talking about some things they shouldn't have been talking about at school, very innocently. They had to go to the principal's office. We had to go down there. And it was one of those shocking things where, you have you might have some children that you're not shocked when you get called to the principal office. Well, these 2 daughters of ours, we were completely shocked. And I could tell when we left, she was just dazed by this. And this was just one example of where I feel like she just took it so hard, like she was failing as a mom because her daughter had gotten in trouble. And eventually, she ended up attempting to take her life through taking pills and drinking when she was home alone. And luckily, her family realized that she hadn't shown up where she was supposed to be, and someone came and found her, and she was able to go to the hospital and get help. And she was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And she hadn't talked to anybody about it. She hadn't told anybody. She hadn't even told her husband that she had tried to go to the doctor before this had happened to get some help because she knew she really wasn't well. And a lot of this began when her father died. So, we can be grief-stricken and it can send us into a crisis. And then, like I say, it was compounded by these events that were sort of normal, quote unquote, events for all moms, but she just took it really hard on herself. And she was able to, through that hospital stay, get some help. She was able to get a psychologist and a psychiatrist and to, share with a few of us that she was going through this hard time. But 6 weeks after that first attempt was the day that Jody did take her life. And I know I've shared here before that it was very close to home, not only because she was my close friend, but because she left her daughter with me for the day. And that's when she did this. And it was just so hard to understand how she could get pushed to this point when she was this, like I said, this happy, bubbly, outgoing, friendly. You'd never expect her to even have depression, let alone to be pushed to the brink where she felt that was her only outlet. And the thing that really stuck out for me after, and it's been about 1.5 years since almost 2 years since she's been gone. It made me think a lot about how she did have people that wanted to help her. She had a very loving family and friends. I was there. She had people to talk to in counseling. She had doctors. But she really had a hard time admitting her pain and her suffering and her need for help. And she had a hard time accepting the help and letting it in. And that's where I really want to leave the point today that, your situation might not ever get as drastic as Jody's, and hopefully it doesn't. And hopefully for your friends and family, the same thing. But we all are going to have times in our life when we need to reach out for help, when we have a crisis, and let's face it, as moms, even if it's just quote unquote, that we don't feel like ourselves, we feel depressed, we have anxiety, that can be a crisis, or if we're struggling with grief or whatever it may be going on with our kids, struggling with problems with our kids, it can be a crisis for us as moms, and we have to reach out, get help, heal. And then beyond that, we can use what we go through to help others. And that's one reason I'm proud to get to share Jody's story today. I know she would be very proud to know that we can help others by sharing a little bit of what she had to go through and what her family's had to go through, so no one else has to go through the same. So for those of you listening thinking, well, I'm never that extreme, or I don't know anybody that's that extreme, we're not just talking about extreme crises, although we will talk about some pretty intense crises today. We're just talking about let's acknowledge what's going on with our mental health and take care of ourselves. And then how can we use that to not only overcome, but to become and flourish, as I like to say. So I'm really, really pleased to have our guest with us today. We've been planning this for a long time, and we've known each other for a while, and I'm just really thrilled to introduce you to Jennifer Moyer. Jennifer, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's really great to be here and to see you.
I know. It's so fun to she was just saying it's like we're hanging out, having coffee, or having lunch or something, right? It's like two friends chatting.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So let me tell our listeners a little bit about you, and then we'll let you start sharing some of your wisdom with us. So first and foremost, Jennifer's a mom like all of you. So how old is your son now?
He is 20 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And in college.
Going through that whole phase. We're just getting into that too. We got 2 in college. So
yes.
So she is a mom, and she's also an author of the book, A Mother's Climb Out of Darkness, a story about overcoming postpartum psychosis. And she will share just a little bit of her personal experience, and that's what her story is really all about. Her book's very inspiring, and I hope you will check it out. You can find her and links to her books and everything on her website at jenniferhmoyer.com. It's Moyer, right? And so she's also a spokeswoman for education and outreach related to postpartum psychosis. Again, she has used her experience to then go and help others, and that's why she's such a great guest for this topic. She's an advocate and speaker on mental health related to childbearing, but also mental health in general. And she's also been a trainer for leadership and advocacy. She's been an education consultant, a postpartum doula, and a volunteer coordinator for Postpartum Support International, which is an organization we're both very fond of and been part of for a long time. She has over 18 years of experience in the area of mental health, and she's been advocating in the area of perinatal mental health for over 15 years. So let's bring her in here and let her start to share some of her hope and inspiration of her story with us as we talk about this really important topic. And wouldn't you agree, Jennifer, that even if the listeners are thinking, well, I don't suffer from any mental health concerns, I mean, chances are at some point, somebody that they know or love is going to struggle with something that they'll need help with, a crisis in some way.
Yes, absolutely. So regardless of whether you personally have a mental health challenge or not, 1 in 4 of all adults, well, everyone will have a mental health challenge at some point in their life. Mm-hmm. So we're all touched by it in some way. And regardless of the fact that in my case, it was postpartum psychosis, I did not have any prior history of mental illness with myself or my family. This was how I was literally thrown overnight into the mental health system. And it was very frightening, and it was very debilitating for not only myself but my family. So wanting to help others when there's a crisis, it is so important to be there and listen. And in the case of postpartum psychosis, where it often comes on very sudden, and the mom may be having delusional thoughts or not be in this reality, it can be very hard to address that with her. And needing immediate medical attention is the case. And for me, my family and I didn't even know postpartum psychosis existed, or as I said, we had no experience with mental health in general.
Wow.
So
let's stop right here, because this is such an important point for all of our listeners, that you can suddenly be thrown, and often that's what it is. I mean, the first time for anybody, I think, is you're feeling thrown into it, but to be thrown into postpartum psychosis when you had no history of mental illness, and here you are having a baby, wanting to be at your best, and feeling completely not like yourself. That's another reason why I hope everybody listening is paying attention, because as Jennifer said, 1 in 4 will experience some kind of mental health issues. And so whether it's with us personally or with somebody we love, chances are we're going to need this information. So first of all, before we get into a little bit about your personal experience, let's talk for a minute about so obviously postpartum psychosis would be one type of mental health crisis, or perinatal mental health crisis specifically. But when we talk about these, how would you kind of define that, or help our listeners to define whether or not they're facing any kind of mental health crisis or a perinatal mental health crisis?
Well, I'd say it's hard to tell. You can't just look at somebody and try to determine if they're going through something that is a crisis. Mm-hmm. Just like, I'm so sorry about your friend, just like her experience, we don't know what's inside of somebody. We don't know what's going through their thoughts. And so it's okay to ask, are you having thoughts of suicide? Or, it's okay to talk about it. And I think because in this society, especially, there's so much shame and guilt, especially I think on mothers. Mothers, motherhood is one of the most important jobs. It can be the most thankless, but it's on the job training for most of us. We don't really have any way to learn other than just doing it. Yeah. And it's supposed to be such a happy experience. And, the way our society portrays mothers, they're super women. They can do everything without any problems. And that's just not the reality. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to recognize that and embrace mothers, as opposed to just expecting them to do everything that is put upon, work full time, take care of the family. It's a challenge, and I think we need to be able to talk about that. And on your program, and things that you're doing with your program are just great, because we need to talk about it. We need to be open about it, and I think that's the first step in addressing it.
No, I agree, and I appreciate what you said about the shame and the, feeling like we can't talk about it because of how society is, and people are embarrassed, and, but yet you also spoke to the incredible reasons why we end up sometimes in these crises, because we have so much pressure on us, especially as women and mothers, to keep up with, and it can be too much for anyone. So it doesn't mean that you're weak. If you find yourself in some kind of mental health crisis, it just means you need to slow down, and we need to get some help. And I agree, the more we talk about it, the easier it'll be for people to reach out when they need the help.
Right. And one of the things that I learned as I was recovered and from my postpartum psychosis and doing well, I would always ask when I saw a mom with a new baby or her children, I would always ask, how is mom? And I think that's something that we forget to do because especially when it's in the perinatal period, we focus on the mom during the pregnancy, and then when the baby comes, it seems like all eyes turn towards the baby, and we forget that, the mom's health and mental health especially is so important.
Yeah.
So just to reach out and to ask, how are you doing? And to, not just blow off her answer or really intimately ask her and, to be prepared for the answer.
Right. Ask wanting to know what the answer will be, even if it's not going to be, I'm fine.
Right. Right. And one of the things with my situation, I truly believe, I don't know that postpartum psychosis could have been prevented, but I had what you call late onset because postpartum psychosis can actually happen generally usually happens in the first 4 weeks postpartum. And it is a medical emergency. In my case, it didn't come on until 8 weeks, severely came on at 8 weeks. And I truly believe the level of support that I had. My mother came from another state to stay with us for about 6 weeks. Oh, wow. And I didn't know what a postpartum doula was at that time, but she literally was my postpartum doula. And she helped with the practical things. And being that she was the mother of 8 babies herself, I considered her an expert. So she came, and I truly believe that every mother should have a postpartum doula.
Yeah.
I think, and in some countries, there is home visitation for quite a while with moms postpartum. But the level of support I had was really, I think, helped delay the onset because it was after I had made a decision to not go back to my career, which we don't realize. I wanted to. I had loved my job and I'd planned to go back, but when I held that baby, I just couldn't put him in daycare, which was our only option. I made the choice not to go back, and I didn't realize how much my support system was my career. So the isolation, so making any major life changes during that time can really add to the stressor for the mother. And even though staying home you would think would be positive, in some respects, that isolation and that change in support I didn't even consider. And then my mother, of course, had to go home. Right.
So that's a big trauma right there when she's been given so much care.
I wanted to do it on my own, but that isolation kind of, so being a support to a mom in whatever capacity, I think is really great, especially, for there's many out there that don't have any support. Right. That's why I really think the doulas, if it was an ideal society, every mother would have one free of charge.
So can you explain for those listening who don't know what a postpartum doula does? Because I think I didn't really ever learn about what a postpartum doula was till I'd already had 3 of my 4 babies that I had. So I think a lot of women don't even know that's an option. And I thought, I want one of those for my 4th. And then, of course, that didn't happen. But I agree. I think it's a wonderful resource. So explain a little bit about that.
Well, a doula is, some of us have heard of labor doulas that assist through the labor and delivery process. Yeah. But with the postpartum, they step in and help. They offer practical support, informational support, and they kind of help the mom. They don't take over. And see, that was one of the challenges I had after I got sick, is the help I was getting sometimes was taking over the care of my baby, which just made me feel worse and more isolated. And the wonderful bond we had was gone because, it was severed overnight, really. So helping the mom bond with the baby is the goal. And it's, having that support person that you can bounce questions off, you can ask, that has the training and the education. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a trained professional, as I said. Yeah. It can be somebody else. It's just with the doula, you get an objective person, and you do have to hire them. Generally in this country, that's the way it works. Right. Which I think the greatest gift that you could do for a baby shower is have all the friends come together and buy a postpartum doula package or
What
something.
a wonderful plan. I love that.
I think, or a
great.
labor doula, I think, that really, we don't think about the after the baby comes,
Yeah.
but very often, but I think that would be, if I had that choice to go back and I knew what I, know now,
Yeah.
then that would have been a great gift.
That's a great idea. And of course, we're talking about some ways that we can either prevent or just help any kind of crisis, especially in pregnancy and childbirth or after childbirth and postpartum, because that's such a vulnerable time. It really is such a vulnerable time of motherhood. And there are other vulnerable times, obviously, if you're struggling with hormonal issues that might make you more vulnerable, or life stress, life challenges, loss, those kinds of things. But I appreciate you sharing also a little bit about that your experience of postpartum psychosis is a little bit different because you did have that support. So it did help in the sense in the beginning, and then later is when you had the harder time. So let's move into that, and maybe you could share a little bit of what it was like for you going through that crisis. And again, for all listening, knowing that I love sharing our stories because I do feel like we can relate in so many ways. And even if we haven't gone through exactly what you went through, Jennifer, we can all relate in some way. So maybe you could share a little bit and focus on how what it felt like going through it and how that affected you as a mother going through that experience.
Okay. Well, for me, the onset, I started not sleeping well at night when my baby started sleeping longer, and the sleep patterns were just kind of disrupted. So the irritability and the anxiousness started setting in. But for me, I just had this sudden fear. It wasn't a concrete fear. I didn't, nothing real, but I had this fear that someone was going to try to kill me and take my baby. And it was so real. I didn't know at that time it was a false belief. But so I couldn't talk to anybody. I didn't know. And looking back, my family may have noticed some of my behaviors, my not sleeping. I went several nights without sleep. So that was when the crisis emerged, and I related this to a tornado. It's like there may be some indications the storm is coming, but if we don't know about it, it's going to hit. So,
right.
And that's pretty much how it happened for me. And as far as the crisis itself, it changed me forever. I mean, as I said, I was very well bonded with my baby, and in my particular case, I had to be forcibly hospitalized. So it just took away my confidence and everything. And it often, postpartum psychosis, I found out later, often leads into postpartum depression, which it did. So not only was I dealing with the trauma of the hospitalization, the trauma of the illness, and the isolation of not being able to talk to anyone that had experienced it at that time. I was not able to reach out to anybody that had experienced it. The isolation was really great. So it changed for everyone in my family. It just changed everything. And then in this country, we don't have mother-baby units like we do in the United Kingdom. Oh. So it affected the family because everyone had to scramble. We didn't have family close by. So, someone had to care for the baby when I was in the hospital. My husband could do that for a limited, I have wonderful in-laws and other family that were able to come and help. So it affects the whole family when you're in a crisis like that. Yeah. And, the goal is to come out of it. And I didn't get the correct diagnosis the first time. I was hospitalized. They thought it was depression. And I didn't open up about the fears I was having because I still thought they were trying to harm me and take my baby, which the reality seemed to be that case.
Yeah,
be the case.
So can you share? So those were obviously the main symptoms, probably. But what were there other symptoms that you were experiencing that led you to be hospitalized? I guess for those.
Well, I was at that point when I didn't trust anyone and I was so paranoid, I wouldn't let anyone hold the baby. So. My husband had no choice to call for help, and he called my doctor, and she had paramedics come, which, again, I didn't know. They appeared to not understand what was happening to me either, which is why I think it's so important for education for first responders, because when a mom is in crisis and there's a baby in the home, they need to be aware that this could be what's happening.
Right.
And it's something that is can be recognized as an illness, and to get the help and not to just whisk her away, to get the help she needs, and have someone that can understand that this is an illness. And I don't know if they could have talked to me to bring me out of it at that point, but I know once I got the correct diagnosis after a second hospitalization, it was such a relief when we had a second opinion, when he started asking the questions.
So let's back up. So the first hospitalization, they misdiagnosed you with depression, did you say?
Yes.
Okay. And let's just pause really briefly. We want to get back to your story, but I know we've done some shows. We've done a couple shows on perinatal mood disorders. We've done a show on the dark side of motherhood where we talked about psychosis and suicidal thoughts and different things that can happen. But for those who haven't listened to those or who don't know, why don't you share just the difference between depression and psychosis, and what psychosis is, and maybe we could just emphasize how rare this is. This is something that's quite rare as well.
Right. Well, the depression obviously is generally less, it's, moderate to mild. Can be severe, but it would not be to the level, it's not necessarily a crisis where it's a medical emergency. With the psychosis, the mom often loses touch with reality. Right. The severe sleep deprivation is huge. And, I didn't know not early, but prior to the onset of me not being able to sleep, I couldn't sleep when the baby was sleeping. And that I now know is a huge risk factor that we should be aware of as a mom. If, you're not caring for the baby and you're not doing other things and you can't sleep, the thoughts just not shutting off is a big concern. And with psychosis, although it is rare, statistics 1 to 2 out of 1,000 births. Australia, they say 1 out of 500, which is pretty much the same thing. Although it's rare, it does occur at the same level as Down syndrome. And the sad thing is there's not any research, there's not any screening, there's not a lot put into postpartum psychosis to understand it better, because we're still learning so much about psychosis in general. And there is research coming out in this country that shows even altered immune systems can affect someone being at risk for psychosis.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's interesting to know that we have a lot more to go, to research and to find out about. But as far as the differences, psychosis is a life-threatening illness.
Yeah.
And requires immediate medical attention. And the very rare cases of infanticide, sadly, they make the news, and a lot of misinformation comes out. So often moms are afraid to ask for help because they're afraid they're going to lose their babies for, the like Department of Children and Families or what have you could come in and take the baby just because they're having a mental health crisis. And that does happen, sadly.
It does, and it freaks everybody out because, like you say, those things become so public in the media, and then you start to worry. And that's where moms who might be suffering from anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or something like that, they are so fearful to talk about it because they're afraid that, they're going to end up like the person you saw on TV. And so that's why the more we talk about it and the more education for families and providers, the better off we are. I also wanted to emphasize your point about the need for providers who do understand this, medical and mental health, and who have been trained. So you very clearly stated the difference between depression and psychosis, yet here you were going to the hospital where you'd think, everybody thinks that they're getting the best care, and that, of course, as a doctor, they should know what they're doing. But they misdiagnosed you, even though they knew that they didn't know about the fears. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they actually, the initial response was that they thought I was I was taking drugs, that I was.
Oh, wow.
And, I had no history of that in my family. But rather than, look at the actual situation that was happening, they were accusatory as far as instead of helping. And I think we've, come a long way in the education and training of those, professionals, but there's still, with postpartum psychosis in particular, there is it's still not recognized. And often it is misdiagnosed as depression because, often that is what is happening. And I believe the moms that do make the news with their tragedies, they're not getting the help they need. They're not getting the proper help they need. And that is part of the problem, is recognizing the condition and getting the diagnosis and the treatment.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. And so to kind of go back to your story, so here you are, your second hospitalization. So I'm assuming you went home from the first one and then went back to another one and finally got the right diagnosis. And like you said, it was a relief in some way.
Yes, I wound up having a second crisis where I did have an actual hallucination and things were not really happening that appeared to happen. So I wound up having to get hospitalized again. This time my family, thank God, intervened and got a second opinion from a doctor who was not an expert per se in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, but he had expertise and recognized the condition. So when I was getting questioned by him when we went for the consultation, it was just a relief to realize this isn't this. I'm not possessed. I'm not, all these things that get thrown around and people think, and that it could be treated. So that was huge to get a name for what was going on.
Wow. And I hear that from so many women. And again, this goes back to your point of we need to talk about this. We need to make it okay and not have women feel ashamed to reach out for help, because I think a lot of women feel like you feel, that when they finally get the right diagnosis, when somebody can say there's a name for this crisis you're going through, whether it be depression, anxiety, grief, whatever it may be, psychosis, and here's what we can do, then that sort of opens the door to the right kind of treatment, the right kind of healing.
Right. And I think it's also important to recognize that medication alone is not the only solution, because I needed medication to get me stable. But once I got stable, there were things that were introduced that did not help me, like the wrong type of therapy. We had never been in therapy before, and the therapist we referred to was trying to fix all the life problems, and that was just added to my stress. So getting the complete balance of the appropriate medication, the appropriate therapy, and support, and ideally peer support, which was the longest thing that I had to wait on because I didn't get to talk to anyone that had gone through psychosis until my son was 4 years old. It's when I learned more about the illness and was able to hear more. But the other thing I think, which is is important to address, because often postpartum psychosis comes out spiritually. Often the symptoms are spiritually based. And for me, that was something I had to understand, because I was a very spiritual person. And it took a very long time. It took years before I had anyone address that aspect. And, I believe we're mind, body, spirit. And for me, until that last piece of the puzzle was put into place, I couldn't fully understand. For me, everybody's on a spiritual journey, I believe. So you need that connection wherever you are in your journey. And for me, that was an important piece of the puzzle that was missing.
That's such an important point, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because I do think when we talk about sort of healing, which we're kind of moving into, is how do we reach out and find the right help and start our healing process. I think a lot of people do focus on one particular way to heal, or one particular resource, like you said, like I need the medication, or I need therapy, or I need, maybe some people are focus too much just on, spiritual healing, and don't allow therapy or medication. So, it can kind of go all ways. But we need to remember that it is, and that's one thing that I learned years ago when I was going through one of my major mental health crises was it's the first time I really got that that I think every time we go through something like that, there is a spiritual wound there too in some way. There's something that needs to be healed on that spiritual level. And like you said, that's personal for each one of us, and it's going to happen, that healing is going to happen in a different way, but we certainly can't neglect any one component of our physical, emotional, spiritual, even social, well-being when we're talking about healing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, healing is, I have moms ask about, how long did it take and this and that, because, recovery is a process, and it was for me. And because it did go into depression, and then I had other stressors, and it took about 2 years, really, before I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. And for me, getting my sense of humor back was how I knew I was going to be okay.
That's good.
And but it's to let moms know that recovery is a process, and it's can be lifelong, because you're never going to be the same after your crisis. And in some cases, it turns in, like I was ultimately diagnosed, it took 7 years, but I was ultimately diagnosed with bipolar disorder postpartum onset.
Oh, yeah.
So it's become a lifelong management for me, and it's something that no one educated me about until 7 years later when I saw an expert in the field.
Wow.
And, so recovery is a process, and I think that's important for moms to recognize, because a lot of times they do want to know, okay, well, what medication helped you, or, what helped, but it's a process, and you need all elements to come together at the right time. And hopefully, as we talk more and more about it, there will be better education, there'll be more awareness. Moms will be getting the proper care and treatment they need.
Yes.
And, we can see statistics go down, because suicide is one of the leading causes of death postpartum, and that's not something that should be happening. No,
I know and I know you and I share that common goal to see that vision come to life that you're describing, and it's true. I always feel that way, that as moms, we shouldn't have to feel that way. We shouldn't have to feel so low on ourselves, so depressed, so overcome. There is help available, and these treatments, they work, they do. You can and will be well. That's what PSI, Postpartum Support International's motto is, that I say all the time: you're not alone. You will, you're not to blame, and with help, you will be well. I know you share that all the time too. Yeah.
Yes.
So important. And your point about it being a process too, though, I want to emphasize for all our listeners that wherever you are on that journey, whether you're just beginning to heal, whether you're just realizing that there's even a crisis, whether you are, farther along in your healing process or in between before the next crisis comes, whenever that happens, that it is a process. And I appreciate you being so candid, Jennifer, about that, that you aren't always the same person after. And I don't think that's really what it's meant to be. We're meant to change and grow through these things we go through, and hopefully we can do so for the better, and come out of it better and stronger on the other side. But it is a process that sometimes, as you said, with, healing through bipolar illness, it's a lifelong process.
Right. And it's, something that most moms go on to get recovered and have no lifelong thing to manage. I just want to stress that. And there is some that suspect that sometimes things get overdiagnosed, or, they don't necessarily take the time to see if a mom is fully recovered before they throw out labels and what have you. And that's another problem. But that goes back to educating the providers. And but I think support is just so important. But I do want to say, and I know that you will concur with this, but therapy is what has saved my family, and I've, just kept us grounded. And, because even though, like you said, when the next crisis comes up, the therapy has been the grounding tool for us, and it literally has saved my family. And encourage as many out there. I use the analogy, you take better care of your car than you do yourself and your family. Sometimes
Yes.
emotional needs,
That's true.
but you get your oil change regularly. So why not get with a good therapist that you can connect with that can help you address your situation. I go for maintenance now and I'm not in a crisis, but I go regularly just because it's so important. And, if I need to, I bring my family into it as well.
Yeah.
But in 2005, my husband and I almost divorced. So the importance of therapy was life-changing for our marriage. And thank God we did restore the relationship and all is well.
Oh, yay.
For the most part, you have your ups and downs still.
Of course. We're still married, so.
Right, after almost 28 years.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
So,
congratulations. And I also want to emphasize the point that you mentioned earlier that you didn't find the right therapy right away. Became one of the most important elements of your healing process. But it took some time, and you were willing to, obviously, I'm assuming, to keep trying until you found what really was going to work for you. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, and I think sometimes, the process falls in your lap, or, if you believe in divine intervention, which I do, we were referred to somebody by a friend who was the turning point in our therapy. This was back when I was still postpartum, and that just changed everything because my husband felt more comfortable and everything. So unfortunately, during the postpartum period, I didn't really get that good directed therapy to get a mom through a crisis.
Yeah.
But, that may have contributed to some of the length of everything that I went through. But it is important to get that right therapy. And then as we were growing and healing from what had happened to us as a family, the family therapy, in my case, a licensed marriage and family therapist, they really helped us a lot. So I can't say enough for what you do and for what all the therapists out there do.
Yeah.
I think it's very important.
You are right. I definitely concur. and not only because this is what I do for my job, but because I've seen it work in my own life. I've been in therapy several times, and I've brought my kids to therapy to help them. And, we've gone to family therapy, and I've had my husband come to my sessions. And, I agree. I really appreciate this point too. And I hope everybody listening, you hear this as well. If you need the permission to think it's a good idea to invite your significant other to come with you, or to do some couples counseling or some family therapy, because obviously, and Jennifer paints this picture really well when she shared kind of how her experience affected her whole family. This doesn't just affect us as women and moms. It affects our children and our spouses and our entire family. So we all need healing. And one thing I really love that you just said is, as we healed as a family, I think that so often the focus is on individual healing, and it's so important to broaden that to whatever your family is. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got as a psychologist is, I was at a conference and one of the speakers said, no matter who's sitting in front of you in your office, always assume you're working with a family. So whether it's one person or two or three, you're working with really that whole family. You're trying to help all of them. So I really appreciate that. So you mentioned the benefit of therapy. Obviously, medication helped as well. And then support was another important element for you especially, and I think for most moms, especially in pregnancy and postpartum, support is really, really important. But I think across the board, when we have a crisis, we need people there for us to help us.
Right. So the reason I now do it, what I do as an advocate, is the peer support is so important, to get some support from somebody that has experienced something similar. We all have different journeys. We all have different stories. But to be able to experience or talk to someone and to connect with someone that has experienced something similar is life-changing. And I know the moms that have reached out to me over the years, it has helped me as well in my healing, because I feel like I'm able to give back and encourage others from something that I went through that was life-changing.
Right.
And it's so that peer support, as well as just trying to increase the education awareness. And something you said earlier about the therapy, it breaks my heart when I hear of families falling apart because one of them won't go to therapy.
Yeah.
And I think, our society has kind of made things taboo when it comes to mental health. And as I use the analogy about the car and the maintenance, we shouldn't be ashamed to get help. Mm-hmm. And I think, that is something that as we talk about it in advocacy, in awareness and education, that it will change. And it is changing. It's a shame that our society waits for tragedy to happen before change happens. And, we need to be more proactive in the area of mental health in general.
I completely agree, and that's why I so appreciate what you do as an advocate for mental health awareness on all levels. We so need to be talking about it, and I appreciate you continually bringing up the need to educate ourselves, but also we as moms, everybody listen, you might feel like you don't know much about mental health, or you're going to your doctor or to a counselor or somebody who's quote unquote licensed or trained or they have a degree or whatever. But you are each your own expert on your own mental and emotional, physical, spiritual, social well-being. And so we can help. We can be part of that education process, whether you work in that area or not. You can help by talking to others, by sharing this episode of this show with other people, by explaining the things that you have learned to help broaden everybody's awareness of the mental health needs of women of all ages and stages. So I really appreciate that. And now, Jennifer, you obviously have used your experience to then go out and do some good in the world and to, like you say, help others. And I so agree with you that I think there's just something ultra powerful about someone who's been through that thing helping someone else through. It's kind of like that idea that you can't lift someone till you're on a higher plane, and once you get through your healing, hopefully we want to look down and sort of like reach down an arm to lift up whoever is next to come up and heal with us. So maybe could you share some advice on how did you do this? How did you turn your life toward advocacy, and how can those listening today maybe follow in your footsteps and choose to either be an advocate either out in the world, in their community, in their own home, or just even for themselves? What's some of your advice on that?
Right. Well, I think the important thing is to recognize is you need to be in a place that you are well enough to be able to help others. And that for me, I got to a place of healing postpartum, and before I found out about the long-term condition that I was dealing with, the healing process was evolving. Mm-hmm. So when I found out some of the facts about postpartum psychosis and perinatal mental health, I got angry, but I turned it into something righteous where I could try to make a difference. And I think that's that light bulb moment for a lot of people that are having a mental health crisis or a perinatal mental health crisis, where they find out the facts and they find out, why did this not get addressed, or for family members. And I think it's important that we are in a place that we can help others. And I think first and foremost, being a mother is the most important thing. And as far as being a self-advocate, to take care of you and have time for yourself. Mm-hmm. But when you get to the place, and it's not for everyone, not everyone, they heal and they move on, and it just depends on what you want to do and where your direction is going. But for me, being able to give back has been so rewarding, and basically starting to educate myself is the first thing I did. I mean, when I did some certification on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, took some support training through PSI when I was a coordinator, and it just evolved. And, if you just kind of sometimes let things happen and evolve, it takes you to a place where you're meant to give back and help others. And that's really how it's happened. But I think self-advocacy is something so important that we tend to neglect and forget about, especially as moms, because we're so busy caring about other people that we forget that we have to make it's like that analogy with the airplane and the oxygen mask. We have to
Right.
take care of ourselves first before we can help others.
Yes, and we talk about self-care almost every episode of this show because it is such a crucial element of being a mother and one that is so often neglected. So I love the term being a self-advocate, advocating for yourself first and foremost, and that is truly how you can heal through this. I mean, you have to at some point advocate for yourself, and or hopefully you have supportive loved ones who can help you advocate for yourself, to get the healing, the treatment and care and help and support that you need. And then you're at a point that once you feel like you're at a good point where you've healed and you are well and feel like yourself again, or you're ready, if you want to, then you can start to educate yourself on the things you want to learn. You can start to look for opportunities to share your story. I mean, that's obviously what I'm guessing what drove you to finally write a book about your experiences.
Well, actually, one of the main things that caused me to actually put my story in paper, I've been journaling since college and before, but in 2003, my mother died suddenly in a car accident.
Oh.
And that was when the realization of these crises and postpartum psychosis and these illnesses. The real tragedy is that the moms are not here anymore.
Yeah.
And I had my mother in my life for 35 years, and I can't imagine growing up without a mom. And so through that, I had this desire to help bring awareness and to share my story with a larger audience. So that's when I began putting it on paper. Of course, getting it published was a whole nother challenge, which
Yes.
we won't even get into that yet. But, so the goal is, of course, in writing the book is to let them know let others know there's help, there's hope, and they're not alone. And that's the thing to take away from anyone's experience, is to be able to give back and hopefully encourage others.
Yes. And I love that you said that, that you made that point that it wasn't something that you did overnight. It wasn't something that you even maybe thought you were going to do for many years. But it evolved, like you said, kind of sitting back and waiting for divine intervention to take over. And this is what came of it for you. And for somebody else, that might be just talking one-on-one with somebody that you see as struggling, or if you hear of somebody in your neighborhood that is going through a mental health crisis, being able to reach out and say, I understand, I've been through something similar, or bringing them dinner or whatever it might be.
Yes.
And that's how we can, again, break down the walls as we talk about it, as we share our experiences. And I really appreciate your openness and honesty and the power of your story. I haven't been able to read all of it, but from what I've already read, it's a wonderful, powerful story and beautifully written. And I encourage everybody listening to go and check out Jennifer Moyer's book, A Mother's Climb Out of Darkness. And again, they can find it on Amazon, right, as well?
Yes, it's on Amazon, and it's also Preclaris Press is the publisher, so it's also on their website. Right now, Amazon has it the same price. Sometimes they discount it, but it's the full retail price. So.
Right, so it's all the same.
And it's on ebook as well,
and through your website as well. They could probably
yes,
find a link.
well, it'll take them to the link. And
JenniferHMoyer.com.
One of the great things that the feedback I've been getting with some of the reviews and people telling me that I wasn't really anticipating is how much it's helped the family members and friends to understand the perspective of someone that's been through it. Because, kind of like we've been talking about, if you haven't walked in similar shoes, it's really hard to see that perspective. And so that was really good. And also that clinicians should read it, because
Yes.
it helps them have a perspective and understanding of something that they may not otherwise understand.
Absolutely. And it's so powerful. And that's why, as we talk about this, that was kind of what we opened up with, Jennifer saying, we need to talk about this. We need to be aware. We need to let go of the shame and the guilt around it and the stigma, and, get the help we need and admit we have a problem and reach out and support to one another. And that's exactly what happens as we continue to share our stories. So I so appreciate you not only sharing it here, but sharing it through your book, which I have to tell our listeners, that's going to be my simple solution for today, is for you to go and check out Jennifer's book, A Mother's Climb Out of Darkness, because it will not only give you more understanding into what this kind of illness is like, postpartum psychosis, and how it affects, obviously, Jennifer and her family, but it gives you that education, understanding, and awareness of just what it's like for anybody going through a mental health crisis, and also some tools for how to get you through it. That's one thing I loved about sharing my book, This Is How We Grow, is people saying, I haven't been through what you've been through at all, but we can all relate. We can relate to each other's stories. Your story and mine aren't exactly the same, but we can relate because we've been through something very challenging and we've overcome it, and we've chosen to not only overcome it, but to use it to then give us more purpose and more meaning in our life, and to help others.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. You don't have to walk in the same shoes. Obviously, no one can, but similar shoes to understand. Having empathy is so important.
Completely agree. And so that's why we can kind of wrap up with this this idea that you can not only, we talk about it all the time, but you can not only go through your crises, but you can grow through them, and you can become better. And would you say, like, maybe just give us a little comment here to wrap us up, but I would guess you would say that you are stronger, better person, whatever, I don't know how you'd put it, on the other side now.
Yes, I am definitely become a stronger person through all that I've been through, and it's helped me grow and to learn. And even currently, I still have crises and setbacks and all, but the main thing is you learn from it and you move on and you continue. Mm-hmm. We're constantly learning as we grow in our age and in our experiences. So mm-hmm. That's the goal, is that we can learn from others as well as ourselves.
Yeah, and I appreciate that as well, that we talk a lot about the seasons of growth, or I talk a lot about it, I guess. But you're right, no matter what season of life we're in, there's always going to be opportunities for us to grow, whether it be a crisis or whether it be just plain old stress or just life change. Mm-hmm. We can always choose to grow through it. So I appreciate you being here today and sharing some of your story. Again, I hope everybody listening, you will go to jenniferhmoyer.com, and also know that, if you're looking for an excellent speaker, you can just hear the compassion and love in her voice, this wonderful person and a great speaker, speaking out on mental health topics, especially. You can find her through her website and find her book on Amazon, Precarious Press, and through your website as well.
Yes?
Yes?
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It was truly an honor to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And for all of you out there listening, I hope you took a few notes today. I hope that you can realize the value of talking about these things, and the value of receiving our own education and educating those who are going to help us heal, and of reaching out for help when we need it and accepting that help. Again, remembering Jody, that I just think that over and over, that what could it have been like if she could have been able to feel comfortable talking or opening herself up to the help that was there. And we all have that choice and opportunity, and I hope we'll take it so that we can heal and not only overcome the challenges that we face, but also use them for good in our life and in the lives of others. And so until next time, I hope you will continue to choose to grow through your life challenges and through motherhood, and keep coming back here each week and join us so we can grow together here on Motherhood Radio. We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.